right, I think we're roughly leveled out.
Leveled.
I just turned,
I'm roughly leveled.
and then your level's not smooth. A lot of people say that about you.
Yeah, no, it's true. It'd be a lot easier if it did, but you deal with the cards you're dealt.
You're dealing with the cards of contesting wrestling that are being dealt to your ears right now from us.
Hi.
Are we? What is
Who
this?
are we?
We wait.
What's going on?
I don't know. I will say I don't. Is this a premium episode? I don't
No,
even know. what
we're
we're
going to
no.
start on the regular episode.
Okay, we're doing a main.
We should probably cut that.
Yeah.
What, do you know what number we're up to? 17? I think it's 17.
No, I want to say 19.
No,
how many
17.
how many times are we gonna say we're gonna stop numbering this before we
It's not. That's
open
yeah,
every
that-
episode with arguing about numbering?
Why don't you just get a tote, keep it like right here, and then just like every.
Yeah.
Well, things end up changing because like sometimes we'll want to push an episode up.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then because of the numbers in Transistor, it's a pain in the ass to renumber everything. So then we just make it like a 0.5.
I've
I
seen
don't
that.
know what that blood curdling scream was outside. But
Just children.
Children.
Yeah, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes between children and people getting murdered when it's happening outside your window.
Yes, sir.
especially when you're murdering children.
Wait, so I got this. So this is episode.
This is a special episode in that we have a special guest.
I'm special.
Yes,
Hi there.
you are indeed. We are joined.
Since it's
Okay.
a regular episode, we should introduce ourselves.
Yes, that's a good
I'll
point.
introduce our special guest after that.
Where this is a podcast in which somebody who has a history of not enjoying professional wrestling,
You, Evan Burke.
I'm getting to that. I'm going to explain all that. Where I, Evan Burke, on Twitter at Evan Burke, etc. I don't understand wrestling, and I relentlessly grill two of my closest and oldest friends, sometimes three, but Betsy is not here today, about why is this? Why do this?
You contest wrestling with us.
Largely, yes.
Yeah. So we decided to record all of that, and so my name is Doc Diamondfire. I've been in wrestling for a while now, for 11 years or so. I do wrestling announcing, commentary, a little bit of everything. Book me on your show and all that. And Professor,
I am Dr.
Who
Ben
are
Abelson.
you?
Who am I?
Who are
That
you?
is a perennial question.
Yeah.
That was your doctoral thesis.
Kind of, yeah. It was what is a person? Yeah.
No, I know. I
yeah.
was making an informed joke.
And I will make an uninformed joke, and it is a perennial question, meaning that it issues from my perennium. You can cut that.
I will not.
I know you won't. You can, but
Yeah,
but should you?
I
No.
have the option to do so.
Try saying please and being polite.
No, I will never be polite to this one. But anyway, I am, now that I say all of that, I am, for the time being, a professor of philosophy at Mercy College, and hopefully will continue to be after they hear this. But, yes, and I am a scholar of professional wrestling. I will be participating in the first ever WrestlePosium this April.
Who is like the wrestling and philosophy guy out
Me.
there, right? It is you right now. Like you're not
As
gonna.
far as I know, it's me.
Because I was gonna say, like, are you gonna have to take someone down to become? Because
There
it is
is-
your destiny. As somebody who has known you for 20+ years, it is your destiny to be that guy.
What about Lucha Plato?
Oh, well, but I mean, he's back in ancient Greece.
Okay,
and
all right,
if he doesn't time travel to the present again, I'm safe.
Okay.
There is one woman in England who I know gave a talk on the philosophy of pro wrestling, and there is another person who's going to participate in the symposium, but I don't, as far as I've seen so far, they don't have any published work on the topic, and this podcast counts as publishing. So,
Oh yeah.
I'm first. If you can dispute that, please, I want to hear your ideas.
I am doing
and steal
this.
them.
I am doing this podcast largely because I have given up on a writing career. So this is a way easier way to just get stuff out there.
You just gotta publish.
I want to hear your ideas and refute them.
and,
You have them.
and-
contest them.
Exactly.
And would you like to introduce our guest this week?
Yes, our very special guest is my dear friend M2J Matt Josephson, who I've known for over a decade now.
Scary.
Which is really scary.
Yeah.
He was host of the long-running wrestling podcast Doing the Job, which was the first wrestling podcast that anyone I knew personally produced.
Trailblazer.
So an absolute trailblazer for this show. He has become notable as a ringside photographer at many indie wrestling events in the New York area.
That's a good gig.
And he is another expert on professional wrestling.
Self-professed historian, wrestling historian, if you will.
And one of the reasons we're having you on is you know and experienced more of 80s pro wrestling, being slightly older than me, and about the same age, I think, as Doc, but Doc started watching wrestling later than you, I think.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell us all of that? Welcome, Matt. Tell us about how you got into wrestling.
Oh, wait,
as a kid.
I could bring back my podcast gimmick here that I usually do.
Oh,
which
do
is-
it.
Oh, yes.
Top of the hour, coming at you, contesting wrestling podcast. Thank you for having me today. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
I started watching wrestling when I was the wee age of like 9 years old, and Hulk Hogan obviously was the biggest twinkle in my eye at the time.
You are a true Hulkamaniac.
Tried and true, not a gimmick, not a work.
And I do have to mention that it was a huge oversight of this podcast not to have you on either of the Hulk Hogan main feed episodes that we did. But we will record a premium episode about the Hulkster with you. But if you want to talk about Hogan here as well, you're perfectly welcome
it'll
to.
come up, I'm sure.
Because when we did the Hogan episodes, I was like, hey guys, we need to do these Hogan episodes because it's something, it's just a big priority for this. And then I remember we were planning them, and Ben, you said, oh, we should get my friend Matt on this, and that was when I pulled out my gat and I fired wildly into the air and screamed, no, we're doing this shit my way. You fucking understand that? And you were like, sorry, and you all relented. And I made a mistake, and I'm gonna own up to that right now.
It's okay, Evan. Your heart was in the right place. You figured it was a crucial part of the foundation of your knowledge, and we went over a bunch of it. But we did save a little piece for Matt here.
As a
My heart
Hulkamaniac-
was in the right place. Unfortunately, many of those bullets wound up in the wrong place, which is inside of people. Anyway, as you were
upstairs,
saying.
because
As a
you can't
Hulkamaniac,
just
though.
fire into the air in an apartment building.
Yeah, I know. I should have been outside. I should have taken that outside.
Yeah.
I can appreciate the importance of Hulk
an
Hogan
office
as a
pop.
major Hulkamaniac, so I understand why you had to get to these episodes right away.
And he paid for it because Evan did not enjoy the vast majority of Hulk Hogan matches that we watched, which is why it's actually kind of great that all that stuff's out there now, and you can let him know what you think about that, brother.
No, I will say, and this, I think I said this on the episodes too, where I absolutely understand, had I been the right age and watching wrestling at the time, there's no question as to why Hulk Hogan was super popular. I guess I feel sort of towards Hulk Hogan the way I feel towards the band Kiss, where if you were 13 in 1976, obviously you were gonna love Kiss. You're gonna be into them. If you are somebody who just got into Kiss in the last few years, I don't understand you or your motivations or
Okay,
what.
I
kind of
get
thing.
that analogy, but at the same time, I mean, those bright red and yellow colors, you can't look away.
No, you cannot look away from Hulk Hogan. And one of these matches that we watched, I will say, especially there was a tanning mismatch going on in one of the matches.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
That's going to be the premium
So
episode.
what are we watching today?
Well, let's let Matt finish.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We interrupted him one sentence into telling us how you got into wrestling.
Yes, yeah, carry on. We'll shut up.
It was Saturday morning. I just remember leaving the TV on after cartoons and pro wrestling would come on. And,
Raw was still on from the previous Monday.
this was actually
I know, this was pre-Raw.
This was
What year is this?
This is late 90, early 91. So we're talking primetime wrestling.
Okay.
I would watch on. It was funny because there was a show. And there was an affiliate station upstate. I don't even know if it was affiliate. I think it might have just been an independent station. And they had a show called Wrestling Spotlight on at 10 a.m., which I have a lot of trouble finding anywhere on the internet, which is rare. And then at 11 o'clock on Fox, there was Superstars, I believe. And then I think USA had All American Wrestling at noon. So I had 3 hours of wrestling to choose from on Saturday mornings.
You lived in upstate New York, right?
Yeah.
in Lexington.
Yeah, I lived in Lexington, New York, which is a small town that currently has no gas station or any businesses at all, really.
So I think there were like really small scale regional syndicated wrestling shows that like didn't show up anywhere else.
I think that's probably Spotlight was on, if I remember correctly, it was WTZA channel 62 on the UHF.
Was it hosted by anyone in
It was
note?
usually Mean Gene, and then they would have like Sensational Sherry would be like his co-host one episode. The next one would be like Jimmy Hart. It was always sort of like a manager or like a B-list wrestler. Like it was never like Hulk Hogan or like Macho Man on there.
Right,
with them.
right.
And they would like show matches just like they would on like Wrestling Challenge and Superstars, but they would like chat with the talent between the matches, and like they would give their like they'd show like a Bret Hart and Paul Roma match, and Sensational Sherry would be like, oh, that Bret Hart's a piece of crap,
Right.
he needs to learn how to really like work that ring, stuff like that.
So you didn't get into
Sherry.
wrestling until the very early 90s.
Yeah.
It's about a year or two before Doc and I, we were somewhere in 92, both of us.
But what was funny was I started going to the video store and renting all these, and it seemed like it was ancient, which I rent like WrestleMania 3.
It seems like so long
it
ago.
It seemed like it was like a millennium ago, and it was really just like 3 years.
It was a few years ago.
It was like,
1985 felt as long ago in the early 90s as it does like now.
I think part of it is when you look at the product, like the just the overall aesthetic of a WWF show in 1985 looked like worlds apart by 1988. Like
the production,
right?
It was like
they put such a high importance on improving their production value that year over year for a long time you can just see it improve. If you look at like old tapes from Madison Square Garden from the late 70s, the WWF looks a lot like the other territories that you could see on tape, except for the ones that used such disposable tape. It looks awful. And in the early 80s, you could see a giant jump in production value. In the late 80s, you can see another one. In the early 90s, you can see another one. And in the late 90s, you can see another one.
Yeah.
They don't happen quite as often anymore, but still, when there's a new technology, I remember when they like changed to HD, it was a big deal. They were like, we're going HD now. They spent $100 million on new studios and cameras and everything, but they needed the production value because that's always been and to this day is still one of their biggest calling cards.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is also a function of our age, right? As a little kid, a few years makes a huge difference. We hadn't seen that much wrestling yet. So wrestling from a few years ago was like, the before times.
I think it is a perfect storm of the two, because like I just if you look at like WrestleMania 1 even, which was like, their S tier show, it's just very dark. It's not super lit. You kind of just get like, it just seems like there's like this blackness around the ring, and then when you get to like 87, 88, it's like this bright blue. Yeah. And there's TV lights now, like actual lights meant for television, like not just like house lights that, they brighten a little bit.
It kind of all looked like bootlegs until 88, 89.
But, I feel like it kind of looks more or less the same over the last 10 years or so. Like if you look at Raw from 10 years ago, it's already HD. It's already like brightly lit. Yes, there's not LEDs on literally everything you could put LEDs on.
They have mostly the same roster. Yeah,
right,
I'm with you. Yeah, that's another thing back then. If like the WWF moved to the future for 4 years, it was not the same crop of guys the way it is now. I mean, there'd be some variant, but
I mean, the Hogan era seemed like forever.
Yeah.
It was only about 5 years. Compare that to how long Cena was on top.
Right. That's how long Roman's been on top now.
Right. Yeah.
We there was something that we watched from 2002.
Yeah.
For this episode, and I was like, or one of the episodes, and I'm like flipping through it. And there's like fucking Brock Lesnar is fighting I can't remember somebody else, but it was just this picture of Brock Lesnar. I'm like, Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
Like, we watched the fucking Brock Lesnar match from a month ago.
Yeah, that's gonna be on the premium episode. That's Brock from when he first debuted, but that was a long time ago now.
On that note, Matt, I wanted to ask you sort of generally before we get into the particular matches, how you feel about older wrestling, the wrestling you grew up with, in contrast to contemporary wrestling, and what's better, what's worse.
The actual matches today are, I mean, physically they're just more impressive. I don't know if it's fair to say that they are better. They're churned out so much more rapidly than, they had an hour or two of like recorded shows every week, and like they could kind of curate the best matches they could get out of their roster back then. and while at the same time not giving too much away with there's not like a lot of Hogan matches on Primetime Wrestling, for example. But when I hear the old timers sometimes say like these whippersnappers got to slow down, they're gonna hurt themselves, like they're not really telling a story, they're just kind of doing all these crazy moves. Like, I think that argument actually holds water. I don't necessarily agree with it all the time. Like, I think sometimes you want to just watch like Ospreay and Ricochet just go nuts like they're in the Matrix, but in a live ring. I do think there is a time and a place for that also. But, it's just the work rate was just very different back. It was much more methodical. The guys were all like, jacked up. They were like 300 pounds. They couldn't even put their arms down. They're not jumping, bouncing all over the ring, but there's still compelling matches in there.
You bring up like Will Ospreay, like in terms of slowing down, like he's probably like the guy on the cutting edge of the crazy moves these days. But occasionally people I know that don't know wrestling that I just know will send me like wrestling stuff, and at least 2 people who don't watch wrestling sent me the GIF of Ospreay and Kota Ibushi, where like he gets head scissors off the top rope and they both like just land on their feet. And the thing that makes that gif so good and that little clip so good isn't the athleticism of the moves, because the athleticism of the moves is great. It's that they do it and then they both stop and the camera gets one of their faces and then the other camera gets the other one of their faces, and that's where the tension really is, with the both of them being like, that just happened, and they're both still, it's very like anime, it's like you can hear both of their thoughts, like the battle will continue. But a lower level like indie guy who can do that move, who can do the exact same move, would do that move and then go immediately into the next move and then go immediately into the next move, and then nothing matters at all.
Yeah. Still, the character and the storytelling and their charisma makes the moment more than just the move. But on that note, as a fan of characters like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, who we're going to talk about
and
a lot
Don
today.
Morocco.
Okay, man. And Don Morocco, in
Rock,
his own way. I mean, he was fucking hilarious.
He was amazing.
Do you find that same kind of magic in the wrestling characters of today?
It sprinkles, and definitely not all of them and not the same, but it definitely sprinkles in there from time to time, and you say, okay, that's what gets me behind guys, is like they're kind of a throwback. Like Baron Corbin, for example, like him portraying his character on Talking Smack back when that was a thing.
Or even more recently on Backstage, I thought he was really good.
I didn't see that, but I've seen some of Backstage. It has a very similar vibe where it's like they're kind of just sent out there and they're in character, but they're ad-libbing, and that was just the vibe of the 80s.
Well, sorry.
And I can say the same thing about Saturday Night Live. Like, it was just like these brilliant comics getting wasted and then going on TV in character.
The over-scripting of the
Yeah.
current shows is probably its worst.
Yeah,
vice.
it's awful. It just feels artificial.
I've definitely found as we like go back and forth between modern wrestling and the 80s, like while I generally don't enjoy the wrestling of the 80s as much, promos now absolutely have nothing on the promos of the 80s. The promos of the 80s were these guys like channeling. It almost makes me think of like religious rituals in ancient societies, or like people speaking in tongues now, where these guys are like plugging into these weird, like, sort of archetypical fucking ethereal demigod beings and just letting it flow through them, and the words are not important. It's just, I don't know, like the fucking Savage promo that was, and like Randy Savage, just the way, the things that happen in his face, while he's like, there is, I've never seen. There are some promos I have seen from the modern day that are cool, where people like dig into the character in a different way. But in terms of just like a raw expression of the human id, like it is untouched from the 80s.
Like, right now, my favorite promos when I watch WWE TV is Asuka when she's walking to the ring, shouting in Japanese at her opponent, because you get all the emotion she's hitting. She thinks she's better than you. She's coming to the ring to beat you. She thinks that's going to be easy, and you're going to have to deal with it. And then you have a match, and maybe she wins and maybe she loses, but who cares? That was really cool.
Right.
But since you've already brought up Randy Savage, the first match that we're watching is the all-time classic from WrestleMania 3, Randy Savage versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. For a long time, a lot of people, and some people still do, consider this to be the greatest match of all time.
I consider it to be the greatest match of all time.
And if you were to watch wrestling at that point, almost all of the nationally televised wrestling coming out of the WWF was more or less Hogan style. It was large, plotting dudes making faces, breathing heavy, and, slamming into each other. And then here comes Randy Savage and all his manic energy, and Ricky Steamboat and all of his precision moves, and nobody had seen anything like this on a large scale before.
And I don't think there had really been anything like it, because it took the athleticism and the great pacing and the finesse and technical wrestling of like more of the NWA style,
Right.
and added the WWF pageantry on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, before we get way into the weeds in the match, like Randy Savage's promo beforehand, he's wearing like this giant purple robe. He's holding the Intercontinental belt like in front of him, like it's, I don't know, like really like it's a sacred object. Like it's giving him power and he's giving it power as well.
Even though he scratched it up with Brasso.
Yeah, well, whatever he did to
What's
it.
that?
He famously tried to like clean the belt with Brasso. That's why that belt was all like kind of scratched looking, and the logo is all like, yeah.
It's not like they have it today where it's like they've explained now they have 2 belts for any given championship. They have the house show belt, which is what the superstars have to travel with, and then they have what they call the HD belt, which travels with the truck and is handed to anybody right before they go on TV. I'm sorry. The HD championship, where they hand the championship to anybody right before they go
call it
on
a fucking
TV.
belt.
Not on television.
By the way, this match is for the Intercontinental title, and I feel like this was the match that really established the Intercontinental title as the workers' title, the title for great in-ring performances, whereas the world title was always for the biggest money-making, merchandise-selling guy.
I definitely thought watching this match. What year was this again?
1987.
This is the same WrestleMania as Hogan Andre.
Right.
Okay,
Hogan
right,
Andre is
right,
the main
right.
event on this show, but this was like the match that stole the show.
Because it definitely, I feel like you see a lot of strains that would come to prominence later. Kind of like they sort of establish. I know, like they're breaking out of the classic sort of strong style or whatever. You see, like there's a lot more
Not
grace,
strong
not
style,
strong.
but
You okay? I don't know.
You mean like power, like all
There
these,
we
these
go.
big power
Yeah,
moves?
yeah. I don't know what I'm talking about, listeners.
Yeah,
That's the whole fucking point of this podcast. Is that, but you're seeing them like it's like they're not quite doing like full high flying. It's not quite like the breakneck speed or something, but it is. You're seeing the beginnings of it. It kind of made me think of Hill Street Blues. Do you know what Hill Street Blues
Johnny Depp's
was?
first acting role.
Wasn't
No,
that?
I'm thinking 21 Jump Street.
So Hill Street Blues was this cop show in the 80s that was basically the first TV show where the people writing it were like, hey, what if we made a TV show that was also good? Like, what if we tried to write it like so that it was like real good? And you watch it, and David Simon, who created The Wire, was on it. David Milch, who went on to create Deadwood, like all of these TV writers who went on to define TV in the late 90s and early 2000s wrote for the show. And if you go back and watch it, it's not really actually that good compared to, because it's 2020 and we're used to watching like amazing shit on TV. But you're watching it and like compared to like shit from the 70s and beforehand, you're like, oh wow, this really was a step forward and contains sort of, you see the seeds of all of these other things that would blossom in the genre later on.
Yeah, influential, I think, is the real word you're looking for. Young wrestlers at the time.
Seminal, even.
Yeah, young wrestlers and aspiring wrestlers at the time would watch that match and want to emulate it instead of emulating what the top style was. And it was easier for them to, because the top style could exclusively really be done by enormous guys, and not everybody was going to be that tall and wide. But Randy Savage always portrayed a lot bigger than he was, and so did Ricky Steamboat.
Well, and that, Ben, you have you've talked in the past about how I think there was an episode where we had watched another Savage match, and you were like shocked that I didn't notice Savage's physicality and all the stuff, and maybe I hadn't learned enough about wrestling or something. I absolutely saw it here, where I absolutely saw him, especially for the time. He's got like the speed and this precision and this grace, and it led me to this is my big meta question about wrestling for the episode, which is, do wrestlers try to be graceful? Is there ever any thought Do you think there are wrestlers giving conscious thought to developing their in-ring gracefulness and, dare I say, beauty?
The good ones.
Well, I think that's a gross oversimplification of it. I think that, yeah, a lot of wrestlers do want to be graceful, but I think that it is possible, and some wrestlers want to do that primarily, and I think that takes away from the storytelling. If you're too graceful, unless you're so good, you can do it all anyway. Like Shawn Michaels can do all of it. A bunch of B-level guys can very gracefully do all of the cool moves and hit all the cool poses, but not really tell a compelling story in the ring with everything. Personally, I like it when a match looks a little sloppy, once again, with people who know what they're doing very well, because then it looks more like a fight.
Well, yeah, not that gracefulness is like a necessary requirement, because there was a lot of characters. Like I watched my first real Rowdy Roddy Piper match for a different episode, and I was like, oh, it's nice to see like just a fat guy trying to beat you up.
Oh yeah,
like
Piper's great for that.
like you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. Like I wish there was actually more of that in modern wrestling, because like everybody now is like really shredded and awesome at the moves, and it would be cool to just see a guy who's kind of like my uncle starting shit at the bar. But I guess for some wrestlers it seems like a factor in a
Well, I've never trained in a ring or wrestled, but like, is there some degree of grace just in terms of like perfecting your craft and working very safe, and that comes with grace, as opposed to the showmanship grace that might supersede that if you just get very comfortable and very good at what you're doing.
If anything, you want to be as graceful as possible in practice.
Right.
Because that's a mark of just learning the body control. It's the same way that if you're never going to have like a fight in any martial arts style, but you train in that martial arts style, you want to do your katas perfectly. You want to do all your motions perfectly, because that's the real point of training.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at in saying that it's the good ones who try to be graceful, because the ones, who pay attention to the craft and want to be safe and do everything really smoothly. And then, if you're really good,
make it look ungraceful.
Exactly. Then you can build the roughness on top of that foundation.
Like when you have those shirts that you printed and you build into the distressing on the shirt rather than just letting the shirt age, like the AEW logo.
Or like distortion in music.
There you go.
know?
Bend that string. Put it a little closer to the amp. It'll make a noise. If you're good, you can control it.
Right.
So the match itself.
Well, just on the gracefulness of it, really quick. Just some of the moves, particularly Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's arm drags.
Oh yeah.
And the way that Savage sells them are really just the most perfect motion in all of wrestling history.
I have found as time goes on, like I love to watch a arm drag exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this is the earliest one that I have seen that feels graceful, that feels like two guys like where it's almost dancing, but they're still hurting each other.
You had mentioned Owen Hart's in the past. They got nothing on Steamboats though.
Yeah. So yeah, what's Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's deal aside from being like, you know what, I'm gonna have two weird names in my name?
So Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is one of the best baby faces of all time. He never really turned a heel in his career. He started wrestling in the early 70s. He was already early to mid 70s. He was already quite the veteran at this point. And really his career didn't go on full time that much longer. He was done in the early 90s. He finished up.
Well, Vince punished him after this match because he had a baby, and Vince wasn't happy with people having children or taking any time off.
Well, that's a one way to put it. He didn't want anyone taking any time off.
Right.
Ricky said, "Look, I need some time off." Vince gave him the time off, but first had him drop the title because they had the title on the shows every week.
I was gonna say I can feel that energy from Vince in his relationship with his own children.
Mm-hmm. But you see Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 4 actually carry his son to the ring with him.
Yeah.
Vince didn't have a problem with him having the child. He didn't want to leave the title on somebody who wasn't going to be working his shows that he was putting on every night.
But then he never like elevated back to the level that he was at after WrestleMania 3, and I think
he didn't stick around.
I think he didn't stick around. That was because Vince was misusing him, and I think that was his penance for taking time off for having a child.
Yeah,
well, he went to the NWA where they let him be the world champion without working the same schedule. And then I think Vince probably, if he punished him for anything, it was leaving for the NWA.
Oh, yeah, 'cause then when he came back, they actually dressed him up like a dragon. And
I mean,
had him breathe fire.
Yeah.
And that's partially a punishment, but also everyone had a stupid gimmick. then.
Yeah.
Look, man.
Except for
people,
Bret Hart and
people
Shawn
will
Michaels.
say that was dumb. Kids remembered that. Like that really made an impression. Like, oh, it's so stupid. He's breathing fire. It's like, no, it's cool, man. He's breathing fire. It's one of the coolest things you could possibly do is breathe fire.
I mean, that could be murder on your teeth after a while.
Oh, definitely.
They also didn't put him over anybody. Or
No, they didn't put him over anybody. That's true.
The only criticism I had of Steamboat in this match is that I feel like Steamboat sells really well in the body and not at all in his face. I feel this is me fucking quibbling.
it's okay.
Is that it was funny to see like he would like kind of move around, but it felt like his face was always he always looked like he was just sort of like focused on the match, which maybe is also part of his character.
I mean, he's one of the few guys. Yeah, it's sort of a stoic pathos, if that makes any sense.
Is it kind of like a Bruce Lee riff a little bit?
Definitely.
Like,
A little
with the
bit,
pa-
yeah.
okay,
Like
yeah.
Karate Kid was like big at that time.
Sure,
They
sure.
They were,
Good
smart,
call.
Smart marketing.
He's one of the few guys ever who was only a babyface.
Wow.
Ric Flair actually says of him that he would have been the greatest of all time, except he only worked babyface.
Which I hear the same criticism for Rey Mysterio a lot of the time.
I mean, he was a heel for that tiny little bit of time in the Filthy Animals or whatever, but that doesn't really count.
Ric Flair said of his past with Ricky Steamboat, he always tried to get Ricky Steamboat to come to the bar and get hammered with him and go to bed with some of the ladies in there because his wife would never find out and everything. And he said all Ricky Steamboat ever did when he'd come down, he'd have like one light beer and then maybe a chocolate milk and then go to his hotel room.
You know
He's an incorruptible guy.
Also, no matter what kind of shape you're in,
Yeah.
I would be so intimidated to fuck next to Ric Flair, right? Because Ric Flair's gonna fuck for 9 hours. Like, what are you gonna do?
He says that on television that's what he's gonna do. I'm gonna show you some of Ric Flair's NWA promos sometime.
If he didn't really do it, someone would have called him on it by now.
That's the thing everyone said about Ric Flair. It's like you'd go to the bar with him every night, and you'd get hammered until well after midnight, and then in the morning he'd knock on your hotel room door at 6:30 a.m. like time to go to the gym, and then you're like, but Rick, he's like, nope, and that's why he was Ric Flair, and you're not.
Oh my god! Like I stopped by a friend's place earlier, and I had one beer today, and I was like, oh my god, am I gonna fucking make it to 6:30? I'm already ready for a nap.
So one thing about Steamboat's face that I mean, because he has in other matches, he has good expression. This match is notable, and Randy Savage in general would do this. He liked to plan out his matches very specifically in advance. Everybody who's worked with him a lot has said this.
And this was one of the earliest instances of that in wrestling, right?
This is around the first time he would have the clout in the WWF to really like go up to somebody and be like, here's what we're going to do, point by point. Randy Savage fully intended on having the best match anybody had ever seen that night. So he, as told by Steamboat, he wrote out and numbered everything that they were going to do, like move number 1 down to like move number 100. And he made Ricky Steamboat memorize the whole thing. And Steamboat said that for weeks beforehand, whenever he'd pass Savage in the hall, Savage would be like 45, and then he'd have to say what number 45 on the paper was.
Damn.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that was Ricky Steamboat's face just trying to remember the next thing.
Fucking totally true. No, because I kept thinking like he looks like he's like thinking really hard about something. Like,
He has other classic matches both before and after this, by the way, with Ric Flair. And somebody asked him like, well, did you like your matches with Savage better or your matches with Flair? And he said, well, did you like actually doing them? And he said, well, with Randy Savage, I had to remember everything point by point and perform it specifically. With Ric Flair, they'd tell us what the finish was and send us to the ring, and then we'd wrestle for 45 minutes.
And as perfect as this match is, if there's any hesitation and any like little tiny botchy little stuff, it is on Steamboat's end.
Yeah,
there's some moments where he's not quite sure.
He's not used to
But
working
that's a
rigid.
tall ask, though, to be like, here's a list of 350 moves, memorize all of them.
no, you picked the matches for this episode.
Yeah.
So
some of them, I think, right? Or was it
Well,
all-
I asked you if you wanted to do this one in particular,
Okay,
and you said that you affirmed that it was the greatest match of all
unequivocally
time.
my favorite match of all time.
so-
well,
Yeah.
I would
yeah,
like
what
to.
And then you picked the bad one.
Yeah, I would like to hear you talk about why
you.
this is your favorite match of all
Go
time.
for it.
I just because I remember in context to that time, there was nothing like this match. At least not on the maybe NWA and AWA and all these other companies had similar, but
Not the AWA.
but it was just and I remember watching this match and actually I usually gravitated towards baby faces, especially when I was 9 years old. Sure. I'm watching this match and I'm like, I really want Macho Man to win, which was just abnormal to want a heel to win. I just was like, I'm so behind this guy right now, and I was actually upset when he lost. But it's one of those matches that you can now pluck it out of 1987, drop it into any wrestling show today, and it would work. It would be well received. The crowd, nobody there's probably countless matches from that era that you can watch today, and you just are like, this is horrible. Why is this a match?
The stuff involving Liz is a bit antiquated, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But the wrestling itself is certainly.
I mean, because George Steele's character at that time.
Oh, the animal.
Yeah. I mean, he was a heel for most of his career, and then he was very much winding down by then.
He looks at least in his face, he appears to be 175 years old.
Well, let's pause for a second. Do you know anything about George Steele, or other than
one of the only people I've ever seen with more back hair than me?
Okay, so he was this monster character. Had green stuff in his mouth
in the 70s.
Yeah, and they started doing this thing where he the crowd started cheering for him. They switched him over to babyface, and they explained his origin story. They were giving him electroshock treatment so he could start talking. And he started forming a word or two every now and then, and the crowd would pop for it.
He had a stuffed animal that he called Mine. And then they sold, stuffed mines to kids.
He would,
he was a brilliant performer.
He would regularly eat turnbuckle pads. He would just rip them open and start stuffing the stuffing in his mouth.
That was one of his big signature things that arenas would like to go, oh, look at the animal. He's tearing at the turnbuckle pad.
Right.
Cotton everywhere or styrofoam everywhere. It was just what a spectacle.
So the backstory to that was that they were kind of trying to make a King Kong thing. He's this monster that's infatuated with Elizabeth, and simultaneously they maintained that very, very. They didn't. I don't think they outright said it because they probably couldn't back then. But they're basically trying to imply that Macho Man was an abusive. I don't know if they acknowledged they were together, but she was his manager. And they would show there was the
was
toxic,
clearly domineering.
Yeah,
well, the toxic,
Mary Hart tried to interview her before the match, and Savage came in and interrupted. It's oh, you want to talk to me? I'm the star.
Well,
here.
there was the one where they're showing their estate, and they're up high on like a diving thing. It wasn't a board, but it was a waterfall kind of thing. And Macho Man's we're taking swimming lessons, and he just shoved Liz off this thing into the water, and she just and him and Jesse Ventura just laugh it up oh, that's so funny.
Ventura,
you just pushed a woman into the water. Ha ha ha.
More like the toxic masculinity man, Randy
Savage.
Yeah.
So
that was kind of the point of the character. His point of being a heel, what made him a heel in many ways, was his relationship with Liz. That would be, the very good woman and the very bad man. They played off each other. People loved Liz because they could see that Savage isn't treating her right.
And she wasn't a heel.
Better.
She stood. She stood by her client, but she wasn't a heel.
And he was so bad because, as skilled as he was arrogant, and he showed that he was arrogant by blocking his manager all the time and physically and mentally domineering it. It was a great act, and it worked for years.
And so macho, but so insecure about it.
And it's actually remarkable because the WrestleMania 2 Intercontinental match was Macho Man defending against George Steele. So this match actually had story going back a year with George Steele being at ringside.
And I think Steele got disqualified, if I remember correctly, in WrestleMania 2, or Savage got disqualified.
I think Savage got disqualified.
And then I think he eventually pinned him on a Saturday night's main event, using cheating and stuff like that. But just one more thing on the Liz Steele relationship. So the whole thing was that Liz kind of liked Steele. And it's this really bizarre sort of thing where
it was King Kongy,
but also Steele represents kind of the average wrestling fan who might have wanted a chance with Liz and thought that they could treat her better than Savage.
It's you too could have a hairy back and the inability to speak.
And it plays into this weird trope that you see in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And I had a English teacher in high school who made a big deal about this, Miss Yoon. If you're out there, what's
Shout
up,
out
Miss
to Miss Yoon?
Yeah, I took acid in your class once. So,
changed my life.
Yeah. Well, I think I might have been listening to her talk about this. So this common thing in literature where young girls are paired up with sort of half men in some way, like men who are sort of non-threatening because they're not quite fully developed men, and it's supposed to be sort of like a practice relationship sometimes for the women. So like the Snow White has the 7 dwarfs, but she also related it to like boy bands and that kind of thing.
Oh my God, I wish I could remember who I saw posting about this. Somebody was talking about how it's like kind of weird that the way that Marvel like finds like very like non-threatening comedic actors and then gets them like super fucking ripped as if they're like engineering these like sexy but non-threatening like
that's how you make movies. That's how you get people in.
Like with Paul Rudd and with Kumail Nanjiani and a bunch of other people. Even like I saw like a picture of like Chris Hemsworth from 2004 or something, and he's just like a normal tall person.
Even Pratt, right, was on
Pratt was popular for being
Parks
a
and
schlub.
Recreation. Yeah, he was a schlub.
Who
mentally still is.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah. We didn't. We got to know him too well. That's why don't get to know your celebrities too well. Because they turn out to suck. Who's reffing this match?
This was Dave Hebner, and I don't know.
Twin of Earl Hebner, who you've mostly seen.
Okay, yeah, he's excellent fucking ref acting in this match.
And Jesse Ventura is letting him have it, which I noticed they did that a lot back then. They would really crap all over the refs if the refs were doing a bad job. Like even Gorilla would be like, I don't know what's wrong with this official. They should be doing that.
This is one of the best examples of the Ventura-Monsoon dynamic, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Because Ventura is right about everything.
And,
and Monsoon has to come up with these ridiculous rationalizations to, like...
He's like, Steele's picking him up and putting him back in the ring so he doesn't get counted out. Like, physically, he's dragging him into the ring, Gorilla. And if Savage wins by count out, he'd keep the title. So that's clearly cheating. Just get disqualified.
There was one where when Steamboat backdrops Macho Man over the top rope, and Jesse Ventura starts yelling that should be a DQ, and it's like, this isn't not here, man. This isn't the NWA. Stop it.
Yeah. Well, it was only because Monsoon complained about Savage doing the hot shot to Steamboat and thought that should be none of these things.
Because it was deliberate, as he put it. Right. He's like, what do you think? He fell into it by accident?
What's up with the ring car thing?
That was a thing that they just did probably because they didn't have a lot of stadium WrestleManias at that time, and they just were like, it's a long way. Let's just have because it's funny because they did it at 3, and then they did it at 6. And then they did it sort of at 9, except they had like vehicles.
Well, 9 is a whole other story.
Also, they did it at 6, with the exception of the Ultimate Warrior
and Hogan,
who ran all. Hogan.
Well, I was gonna say I remember.
And Hogan walks in WrestleMania 3 also. He does. He parades down.
Right.
Hogan, doesn't Hogan get carted back?
And 6 he does.
6, okay.
Yeah.
I remember watching that Ultimate Warrior match where he like runs this incredible distance all the way to the ring, and he gets there and then does his whole opening act, and then like after like a minute he just visibly looks like, oh fuck, like I'm already out energy.
Good thing there were a lot of bear hugs in that match.
Yeah.
Right, so the other thing with the carts that I'd like to point out for WrestleMania 3, Andre really needed one. Like, Andre wasn't in as bad shape as he would be a couple of years later. But, like, you saw the Hogan-Andre match. Like, Andre was having trouble walking around the ring. He wasn't going to be able to get all the way down that aisle. He could have if they let him use his cane. But considering he was wrestling for the World Championship, that's not a good look.
But he also, in addition to having back problems, he was very, very drunk at that time.
That's what he used for painkillers, basically.
He would put down, like, several bottles of wine before a match.
So a couple more things about the match. The backstory to the match where Savage takes out Steamboat with the ring bell to what the announcers called the larynx.
I wrote that down here.
Larynx.
Larynx is the way you pronounce that
Jesse
word.
Ventura says it multiple times. Larynx. And I noticed Gorilla every like strike move that Steamboat throws, he calls a karate shot. Everything Steamboat does is a karate shot.
But that thing with the ring belt and also the hitting him with Savage hitting Steamboat with the double axe handle off the top rope onto the barricade. That was some of the more violent stuff that had happened in wrestling that I saw as a kid.
I feel like a lot of Savage's storylines always felt much more serious than a lot of the rest of the product.
More savage.
More savage, if you will. And by the way, I absolutely love when the initial incident happened when he attacked Steamboat. That was when Bruno Sammartino was a backstage interviewer at the time, an announcer, and he's backstage. He's interviewing Macho Man, and he's like, "This was terrible." He's just baby facing it up, and I love this so much. He's just like, "How could you be happy about that?" And Macho Man starts, "I'm so proud of myself," and Bruno fires up and he goes, "You piece of slime, you're happy about it?" And he starts strangling him, and like the entire locker room comes out to get Bruno off of Macho Man.
Oh, Bruno.
It is one of my favorite promos of all time.
They ended up having a match at some point.
They did, and I think Macho Man like sneaks a victory somehow, but then he puts him. Bruno puts him in a bear hug, and they booked him like a monster. Like the locker room comes out, and they're trying to get Bruno off of Macho Man. Just to establish a dominant.
Why would you use Bruno unless you want to portray him as the guy who retired voluntarily because he had been on top for 15 years and was just done? It's like, so he's a little older. He'll still squeeze you till your eyes pop.
They really made him. I felt like, wow, they really they gave him like the Brock treatment.
Yeah.
The finish of the match, by the way, is Savage goes for the ring bell again, goes to the top rope. And the animal shoves him off of the top rope. And they claim that his head hits the bell, though. It didn't come anywhere near it.
Gorilla always would just change the narrative a little bit. Like, they would literally give the attendance for a show, and Gorilla would be like, I don't know, they said it's 20,000. It looks more like it's 28,000 to me. And it's like, okay, Gorilla, why would they lie about that?
And then,
So, he's like, the bell rammed Savage in the face. No, it didn't.
So Savage is kind of woozy off of that. His back hurts. He goes to pick up Steamboat for a slam, and Steamboat reverses it into a small package for the 1-2-3. And that finish also just seemed brilliant to me at the time. I hadn't seen a lot of really cool, slick finishes when I first saw that match.
Yeah, now they're overused, if anything.
Yeah, that's true. There were a lot of 2 counts in this match.
Oh, and that wasn't even a big thing back in the day. Like, and it was like rapidly one after the other. Like you do get. It's another thing you get.
It was
a lot
a way
now.
to keep people paying attention because they didn't usually see, like you said, a lot of matches with a lot of near falls.
There was a lot of those cool. I don't know if there's a word for this, like the ground rolling reversals.
Yeah,
kind of where
sequence.
I guess.
Like chain wrestling.
But the other thing about the finish is it's really interesting because Steamboat is obviously the babyface here, and he wins. But for the babyface to win in such a cheap way, like the crowd has to really, really be behind him, that they don't care how he wins at all.
Yeah.
And it's a testament to how well the story was built between them that the fans accepted that finish. Though I think probably some of them were like you and were pissed that Savage lost.
Yeah, I felt like I was behind Savage during that match for some reason.
And it wasn't long before they turned him face.
Yeah, it was like shortly after that.
I think we haven't brought up, Steamboat cut a promo too before this match.
Yeah, it was a clash.
Yeah, and he's not, he's not the promo Randy Savage is, but I don't want to discount it with it. He sounds a little wooden, but otherwise he's really intense. He looks like, a Karate Man character. That's what he had been doing for years, and so he put it on through the camera, and people were really into that.
His real name is Richard Karateman.
Yeah, Richard Karate Man.
Like
it's actually Richard Blood.
Nobody was the promo that Macho Man was.
Yeah, nobody.
It's like unfair, but like, and the other thing is funny because I'm guessing most people probably watched it on the network, and they have that bootleg Alan Parsons Project Sirius as his theme because Steamboat's actual theme at that time was Sirius by the Alan Parsons Project. And they changed it to like a bootleg, which I wish I could find because I actually kind of like the bootleg version also.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I like watching through old WW Nitro. I like some of the inserted music better than the music that they would actually use. Like the theme the WWE Network theme for Sid is a real banger for.
Which also funny because the audio, the way they recorded the audio in WCW, I think the commentary track was on the same recording as the music. So for a lot of the entrances, you just have the music with no commentary.
Editing that stuff out is such a huge pain in the ass.
It's got to be brutal. Yeah. Like at least,
and they have to do it.
Yeah, at least WWE had it isolated.
I've heard the rumblings are that Ring of Honor is working very hard on scrubbing their catalog because they want to put their whole catalog from back in the day on their streaming service, and it's not on there now because they used all that licensed music, and they can't just put it all out.
The licensed music was so important to so many of the characters, though, at the time. What is Bryan Danielson without the final countdown, besides being the greatest wrestler of all time?
Wrestling, we are the champions.
Yeah, oh, man, that's even more important, yeah.
So the other match that we watched today.
We watched another match.
So I'm gonna be honest.
okay,
you're being honest.
A lot of the times when you guys are talking, it's a lot of words, and I'm in and out. Like, I try to pay attention, but it doesn't always happen. I'm gonna be real honest about that. So when we were
in the
watching,
deep end. It's okay.
when I started watching this, I kind of had this like, did we like have a discussion about this?
Matt,
I could not understand what the context was.
So I asked Matt for a bad match to pair with this good match.
And this is the bad match of the two.
Yes.
Well, I knew it was a bad match. I guess it was. We've watched a lot of like bad matches that are spectacularly bad or something like that, and because we have actually delved very little into like weekly Raw episodes and that kind of shit. So this was like kind of one of the first like blah matches.
So the match is Shawn Michaels versus Vladimir Kozlov from the March 2nd, 2009 edition of Monday Night Raw. And Matt, why don't you tell us why this stuck out in your mind as a particularly bad match?
Well, any wrestling fan knows that Shawn Michaels can have an amazing match with an inanimate object.
Yes.
See WrestleMania 10. And
Wait, Razor Ramon was also in that match.
I know, but was he really? I mean, he did climb the ladder at the end, but like, spoiler alert. But
Razor knows what he's doing, but your point is made.
Yeah. So literally the year before, they had him in the ring with Ric Flair because Ric Flair wanted to have the best possible match he could have as his last match, and it was Shawn Michaels.
Really? Oh man,
we'll watch that.
When we do the Ric
Definitely
Flair
watch that,
episode.
Yeah. And like that was obviously like kayfabe, but also real at the same time. So
Fantastic.
yeah. So at this time, what was really funny about this, so that we're building to at WrestleMania in a few weeks. It's going to be The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels,
which a lot of people think is the greatest match of all time.
It is a phenomenal match. It was at WrestleMania 25. Before they had this encounter, Shawn Michaels and Undertaker had several matches in the past. Shawn Michaels always either won them or the match was thrown out because it became a schmoz. But so Undertaker never actually had like a victory over Shawn Michaels, and they're obviously playing up at this point that Undertaker is undefeated at WrestleMania. So Shawn Michaels is now like, well, he's never beaten me. I'm going to end the streak. And, they both have these catalogs of careers behind them. So, like, they both have a lot of juice going into this. Vladimir Kozlov is on the roster for about a year, and he's undefeated. And I'm using air quotes for anybody who's not in the room.
So wait, explain this.
So he was undefeated.
So air quotes are usually a thing.
No, not the way air quotes are. Matt, explain in what way he was actually defeated and not undefeated.
So he was undefeated for a good portion of this year, but what happened was he started losing matches. He lost one by DQ, lost one by countout. I think he was actually pinned during Survivor Series.
So he hadn't been pinned or submitted in a one-on-one match.
Right. And they start kind of just carving up the narrative a little bit to say, well, he's never been pinned. And then they kind of just expanded on that back to he's undefeated. But like at this point, like he had, I guess you could say like in a one-on-one confrontation he hadn't been pinned, but that just became undefeated. So the week before this match, it was the week before this match
on SmackDown,
he wrestles the Undertaker. It was like a throwaway match. It was like, oh, the Undertaker and Kozlov, and Undertaker's going for old school, which
it's when he walks the top rope like a tightrope.
Right. Okay.
And he would jump out and just kind of club you with the forearm. He catches him and power slams him, and then gets a quick 1, 2, 3, and the crowd is like, "Wait, what?" So now they're really milking this Kozlov is undefeated thing. He just beat the Undertaker. No one beats the Undertaker, and so now we're in the next week. The winner of this match, Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, gets to go on to wrestle.
Kozlov and Shawn Michaels.
What did I say?
Undertaker.
Yeah. Gets to go on and wrestle Undertaker at WrestleMania. And Shawn Michaels tries to have a good match with Kozlov. And the only thing I could gather from... And actually, this match was slightly better watching it the second time. I think I just am watching it with kinder eyes, maybe. It looks like they kind of gave Kozlov the chance to be the ring general in this match and just said, hey, like, I'll let you control what happens. And I guess Kozlov had just no ideas because... When Kozlov is in control he's pacing the match out and like nothing is happening.
That's when I thought it really went downhill. Like you get the beginning, Kozlov's throwing HBK around, that looked fine. The finish where HBK inevitably wins is fine, but Kozlov's heat was just like I don't know. He does like a torture rack.
Which is
maybe a
good.
bear hug.
But here's
the moves aren't badly done, but
No, the
I'm
bear
just
hug-
completely
the
uninterested.
bear hug, he kneels. They're both kneeling, and he bear hugs him while kneeling. I've never seen that before, and it looks awful.
It looks terrible.
Yeah.
I like watching this. I really got the feeling, like, especially like this is like this is shortly before Shawn Michaels leaving. Like, I don't know if he ever like retired, but like this is shortly before at the end of Shawn Michaels' like major televised.
It's about
career.
a year before, yeah.
Shawn like facially looks haggard and older and stuff, but he comes in, he still has more energy than I had as a child. He still bounces around. You can tell he's putting in everything he has, and like there's like 2 or 3 times in this where there's just a long pause where nothing happens, and then one of them starts punching the other one a whole bunch. Most hilariously, there's one part where Kozlov is like pressing Michaels over his head, and Michaels is just punching Kozlov in the head while he's being overhead pressed.
That I'm okay
and that
with.
goes on for not that it's bad,
Yeah.
but that's clearly to me that clearly read as them being like, well, what do we do next? Well, what do you want to do
Or
next?
Sean being like, go to the next thing. I'm punching
yeah.
you in the head. Put me down and do something
But
else.
there are like there's a lot of like older guys, especially like I feel like British wrestlers and UK wrestlers in general have that notion of like trying to make it look real, and like when you're in like a fireman's carry, you don't just hang in the fireman's carry. You try to like fight your way out of it and like go grab their nose, grab their fingers, like look like you're actually trying to get out of a move.
Sure.
Don't look like you're
Yeah,
cooperating.
because when you're just being press slammed and you just are hanging, like why would you just hang there unless you were unconscious? And if you're unconscious, what's the point of being press slammed?
But it's also up to the guy who's getting punched to like make it look like it's a little more difficult.
Yeah, make
for
it look
them.
like it's a struggle.
Or, yeah.
But yeah,
You pause for a second so the cameras can take shots.
arf, arf, arf.
Yeah, that's actually somebody getting murdered.
You pause for a second for the cameras to take pictures, and then you do your move. You don't just stop because you're frozen. Now, it's interesting what you said about how like it looked like Kozlov was like calling the match and Sean was performing it. You're probably just coming that off the top of your head, but around this time frame, a year or two before, Sean had a pay-per-view match with Chris Masters, who at the time was very like young, and Chris Masters had said like, to anyone who doesn't think he had any ideas, which if you followed his career later, he had some ideas they just didn't use. He says that he called the whole match with Shawn Michaels, and it was Shawn's idea. And Shawn said to him, "You tell me how this match is structured. I'll perform it to the level of Shawn Michaels." And Shawn wanted to see what he had. If can you put together a good match? Because if you can, I'll perform a good match. And if your theory holds any water, and I don't know, one way or another, I could see them trying that with Kozlov. Be like, okay, so do you have a good match in your head at least?
At least that
Yeah.
couple of minutes where Kozlov was in control.
Yeah.
Like, all right, what are you going to do?
Because I mean, Shawn Michaels' merits speak for themselves. We know he can have a good match with
Right.
a ladder, for example. And so,
So Kozlov seems bad.
Yes.
so I didn't even think Kozlov
wrestling.
was that
Yes.
bad. Like he had better matches with other wrestlers at that time. Not like 5-star classics, but still like this match just fell flat. And for a Shawn Michaels match with anybody to fall flat as this one did, just was weird.
Kozlov, he had a little more success later. They turned him face and made him a comedy character, teaming with Santino Marella. He was sort of unintentionally funny, and then they transitioned that pretty well into being intentionally funny. But, he was just another in this long line of, Vince McMahon's love for evil Russians. And I don't know, what did he do? He was
But
some
he
kind of
did-
martial artist before this,
Like
right?
Russian Sambo or something?
Yeah,
Something-
Russian
something
Sambo.
like that.
But I guess I don't know. Maybe this wasn't a great example of his character compared. But like he didn't even seem like that Russian. Like he didn't seem like anything. He didn't seem like he was doing or expressing any.
Well, he really
kind
wasn't.
Of
And
character.
not too long before this, he didn't even have entrance music, right? He would just walk to the ring.
He started with no music. That's
Would
right.
they dim the lights or something? Like
They might have given him a
I
spotlight.
would love to see a wrestler. That would be a fucking power move.
Yeah.
If you had no music.
they do that
It happens
occasionally.
you
once
just
in a
like
while.
We
walk
watched that.
slowly
We
to
watched
the-
that with Ciampa during the feud with Johnny Gargano.
Yeah, the crowd
He
just
had
booed
so
him.
much
really?
heat that they didn't
that
give
he
him
just-
music because
yeah.
they wanted to hear the crowd noise.
And R-Truth, for when he first turned heel and was a serious heel, you were talking about that on one of the shows recently, that it would literally just be his voice going, "The truth will set you free," and he would
I
just,
remember that.
He would just walk to the ring. There was no music or anything.
He was such an underrated heel at that time.
Yeah.
They gave him one main event against John Cena and then immediately made him a joke again.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything I've seen, every the few moments I've seen of R-Truth, he's clearly a fucking brilliant performer. We'll have to do an
He
R-Truth
always adds to the screen when he's on screen.
Apparently, Brock loves working with him and wants to work with him more.
Good.
If you believe the rumors.
Kozlov, the one really thing he did really well was hitting people with his head.
Yeah.
He has a large, hard-looking head, and even when Sean comes flying off the ropes at him and he hits him with his head, it looks good.
When that spot first happened, I thought it looked weird, and then they replayed it, and I thought the replay did it a lot of favors because it just looked like it was like a mistimed thing when it first happened.
Good editing can really make a good match,
Yeah.
and live editing is one of the hardest jobs in production. As evidenced as whenever you see some of it go wrong, you immediately see it, and it looks terrible. And then you think, if you don't have a really good live editor, that would happen all the time. The big failure with Kozlov in general is that, they brought him in as like the big Russian heel. I mean, first of all, nobody cared about the Russian heel in the late 2000s. Not really. Certainly not like they did in the 70s or the 80s. But
No, I mean we had a solid 18 years where Russia was not the enemy,
And
then
even
that
if you
was
were to
right in
do
the middle of that.
even if you were to do the Russian heel now like that, this wouldn't be the character that would like. He's trying to do even Drago from Rocky IV, and that movie was quite old by then.
Yeah.
Now it didn't work for a few reasons. First of all, that's an outdated reference. Second of all, he didn't have the charisma to pull off the like Frankenstein monster wrestling that he was trying to do because he wasn't flexible. He didn't do a lot of moves. He was just and they figured they'd make him feared by just having him win matches. But instead, his matches where he won, it just sort of deflated the crowd because they couldn't connect with him. They didn't really hate him. They didn't really like him either. And around this time, they were starting to realize he wasn't going to be the next big main eventer.
I have not followed or cared much about all the Russiagate shit, but man, it would be amazing to have a Russian character now who was like fixing elections in NXT or something like that.
They were even doing this.
That would be a lot of
if
fun.
if they didn't want to stay away from overt political
yeah.
references as much as possible.
But even
That makes sense.
Rusev, like 6 years ago, they had him out there with Lana, and they were showing pictures of Vladimir Putin and saying he's a real leader, not like Barack Obama. And Vince just loves to just drudge this up every like half decade or so, and just
It's because he lived through the Cold War. I think people and it's getting further and further in the past, but people kind of our age and younger, I think, don't quite appreciate the deep internal cultural force on America and on Russia that was the Cold War.
Oh, God,
And
yeah.
I mean just older than like guys like us. If you're 50 now, and we're all like our late 30s and so on. If
I
you're
mean,
50
to get
now,
a little conspiratorial, Vince is good friends with Trump.
yeah, of course.
Russia as a feared evil power is good for conservative politics,
It is.
and so on.
Look at how powerful that narrative is, that people very seriously argue, look, if we guarantee health care for everybody, they're gonna start executing journalists in Central Park. And it's just like, to anybody born a little later, they're like, I'm not really making that connection, man.
Yeah.
I don't really see where that's coming from.
I mean, not to get too far into our politics. Not that I mind that when we get into our politics.
yeah.
Like,
That's not the point of this show,
I was
but we'll have
talking. I was
moments.
talking to my father, right, and he's like, "So what do you, who do you think has a chance?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't like to make exact predictions. I like Sanders." And he's like, "Oh, but don't you think like the people here like socialism and just immediately shut it down?" And I'm like, "A lot of those people are dead now.
Yeah. They died because
You know?
they didn't have access to good
Well,
health care."
yes, and they're old." I'm like, I was on talking on Facebook with a friend of mine from high school's mom who was like, "Oh, I guess that the kids will be like the guys like Sanders, like the millennials." And I'm like, the oldest millennials are almost 40. We're not the kids.
I know the right
And
is
by the way, we're the biggest block of people
Yeah.
in the country, so we should start acting like it.
the right is trying to stoke that back up by being like, look at Venezuela, they're socialist,
Yeah.
or like something like that. And so they want to recreate that narrative as much as possible.
Fun fact: in all of the Nordic countries, a larger percentage of the economy is under public control than in Venezuela.
Right.
Yesterday, I was having an argument with somebody about. I was like, Michael Bloomberg's not the fucking answer, and I got a shocking amount of pushback on that from like other New Yorkers. Who were like, I didn't think this was going to be an issue, and somebody said to me, "Look, man, if you choose the lesser of two evils enough times in a row, eventually you wind up with somebody pretty good."
Yeah, that's not how that works.
That has not been how
No.
it has worked.
No.
if you
No,
choose,
because the lesser of evil could become more evil in those 4 or 8
Yes.
years.
Yes. If you choose the lesser of two evils over and over again, eventually a guy like Trump shows up. It's just like, screw all of you. And
Yeah.
people are going to be like, he makes a lot of sense, and give him the White
The greater
House.
of the two evils can become more evil over time,
Yeah.
such that the lesser is also more evil.
Yeah, you are guaranteed to wind up with at least medium evil after a couple rounds of that.
Right.
And unfortunately, if Kozlov had been evil, I'm gonna fucking bring it back around.
No,
It'd be way more
you're-
interesting. But I just
right,
get
though.
nothing.
All his whole character was that I'm Russian.
Well, here,
And he loves double E.
Did
Right.
you ever see? It's like it's so weird and sad to see a Shawn Michaels match that isn't good, where he doesn't have chemistry. It kind of reminded me of if you watched Luke Cage on Netflix. There's a scene where the dude who plays Luke Cage, Mike Coulter, and like Rosario Dawson are two unbelievably attractive people who have less chemistry than I have ever seen two actors have in any televised context. And there's a point where like they make out, and it's like really like uncomfortable because they seem like they don't want to be there, and it's just sad to watch two really attractive people to have bad chemistry.
Especially when his chemistry with Jessica Jones was awesome.
Oh yeah.
the soft reboot of Terminator a few years ago, where it was what's her name, Daenerys and another guy.
Yeah, I did not.
They had, it was Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese, which are star-crossed lovers. They had no chemistry in this movie. It was awful.
Oh, it's so sad.
And then Shawn Michaels has chemistry with a good number of people.
Like 90% of the roster. But
Alex Kozlov was not one of them.
And here's the thing, like, you're like, okay, well, this match is going to pick up any minute. And then, literally, Michaels gets a reversal, he does the elbow, and then just hits Sweet Chin Music and wins. And you're like, that. First of all, that's how they end the undefeated streak that they've been... And
well, like I said, they realized he's not going to be the next main eventer,
Right.
so they don't need to protect
but,
this
like,
anymore.
they should
But
have
they
been like...
did just have him beat the Undertaker
Yeah, like a week
ago.
before that. They
Yeah.
have, and I guess I get like, all right, they're gonna have him be the guy that Undertaker never beat. Now he's gonna beat the guy that just beat the Undertaker. So he's looking like $1 million going into the WrestleMania match.
It felt like Vince pulled the plug on Kozlov like 3/4 of the way through the match. Like it felt like Vince was watching
Like
from
he
backstage.
called an audible and was like, nope.
Yeah, he was watching from backstage and he was like, you know what? I made a mistake.
That's very possible.
I made a fucking
It is
mistake.
possible.
We're shutting this down right now.
It might have also just been Sean being like, man, this heat was so bad. This comeback is going to be fairly cold. Let's keep it short.
Yeah.
Well, also one thing that you pointed out, Evan, this is a Raw match. This isn't a pay-per-view match. They have very strict time things because they need to go like, here's the commercial break.
The match is
and all.
quick. I don't even think there was a commercial break in this match, right?
No.
It's
So they don't have to necessarily. The point of a match like this isn't necessarily to have the greatest match you've ever seen. I mean, it should have been better than this, but it's like they knew that the comeback and finish would be real quick in this one. They wouldn't do a full. Because I don't think the point of the match was to showcase Shawn. I think the point of the match was to see if Kozlov could piece something together, and he just really couldn't.
And it's that's a perennial theme of my issue with wrestling is like is the massive variance in quality and the fact that you never really know what you're getting when you get there, and it just seems like it's really frustrating to have a tossed off match. Like I understand, like you got to have a show tonight, come hell or high water, you got to fill this time. But it's like, it sucks to see a bad match that's a waste of time with a guy who's not fucking good at it.
Which describes pretty much every match on weekly WWE
you
television.
bring up a
these
really,
days.
really excellent point, too, because WWE is supposed to be like the A wrestling show in the world.
Yes.
They're supposed to be hiring and procuring only the best talent that's out there, and all these guys are supposed to be able to just work at, like, an amazing work rate that just blows everything else out of the water, and then you just have this weird.
To that point, they had their developmental system for a few years at this point.
Well, this was back during that period, yeah.
But they hadn't really refined it into like what NXT became. So they were actually having trouble finding talent.
Yeah.
Because there weren't other promotions to steal.
Well, this is when they were home growing everything and it wasn't working out.
Right. They had started to home grow everything because
OVW worked for a few years and then it kind of stopped.
they had no direct competition to take from. So yeah, they hadn't quite figured out how to develop new crops of talent all the time.
As opposed to now, where they've signed so many people that it's hard to even differentiate yourself in developmental.
One of the big things I've really learned doing this, and it seems obvious in retrospect, but it's something I was not aware of at the time, is we've watched matches that take place like outside in front of a group of like 50 people that are a lot better than what airs on average on fucking like WWE television.
You ever see a really good band in a club opening for
exactly. It's the same thing.
If you're that good every night, eventually you'll play the arenas.
Cream rises to the top, as Macho Man once said.
Cream rises to the top.
I took a couple of notes that I just had to comment
on.
Yeah,
yeah, please.
Yeah, bring it on.
They keep driving home. This is the 25th anniversary of WrestleMania. No, it's not.
It's the 24th anniversary.
Right, it's the 25th
it's
WrestleMania
25.
Yeah. Somebody in the crowd had a 16-1 sign, but then the 1 was crossed out, and I couldn't tell if that meant like that he would not lose the match. This is for Undertaker.
I guess that's like a weird double thought.
When Shawn Michaels first hits that elbow smash before he hits the Sweet Chin music, he's going for the elbow smash, and Jerry Lawler yells, "I wouldn't do that." Why wouldn't you do? You've been watching Shawn Michaels wrestle for like 20 years. Why would he not do one of his signature moves when he has his opponent down? Like, it was just like.
You mean the forearm smash?
No, when he would do the elbow.
Oh, the elbow from the top.
Yeah, Kozlov's about to do it looks like a belly to belly suplex off the top rope, and Michaels hits him, knocks him off, and then he goes for the elbow. And right as he's going for it, Jerry Lawler goes, "I wouldn't do that."
Well, he wouldn't do that.
Well, yeah.
Well, like his big move, because he couldn't do the pile driver in WWF, became the fist off the second turnbuckle on the inside.
Yeah.
He would take his
punch,
strap down and
I mean, I groan about it. It gets over.
It does.
I can't
the
hate
strap
that.
and the punch.
Yeah.
I like a good fist drop.
Yeah.
Like a good fisting every now and then.
There you go.
Well, on that note, unless
Cool.
do we have some final thoughts, or what
was your takeaway from these two matches as the non-wrestling fan?
All right, my takeaway was I would like to watch some more Randy Savage.
For the premium for this episode,
Yeah.
I think we'll watch more Savage.
I already knew that Savage's promos were fucking untouchable. I learned more about his wrestling stuff, and I would like to watch more Ricky Steamboat too. I think
we'll almost surely do Flair Steamboat at some
yeah.
point.
I knew that was coming. Yeah.
And my takeaway was to just confirm my belief, my positive feelings about Shawn Michaels, because you know what, watching somebody go out there and really try to work with a guy who's just a fucking wet sack. Like, you really respect the job of wrestling, and you really respect the fact that, like, this dude is, like, he's one of the greatest performers on earth, and he's still fucking got to go out there and work with schmucks sometimes, and I appreciated that.
Speaking of a wet sack, Kozlov's little white trunks were just awful.
Yeah. Real gross.
I approved.
Yeah.
I thought that's a throwback to the 80s, and I totally approve of that.
True. Yeah, I thought Kozlov's style would have worked much better in
absolutely.
1982.
Really? You think the evil Russian character would have worked better in the 1980s?
I mean, well, yes. I mean, just his
Everything
wrestling
about
style, you know? I mean, even then, like, Nikolai Volkov was doing it better.
I do feel like Sheamus is somebody you could just drop into like 1984 and he just would work amazingly well.
Well, Sheamus is 100 times the worker that Kozlov is. But yeah, I think you're right.
Looks like an action figure.
He's got a great
was the
look.
style at the time.
Great physique, great work rate.
They could have done, and there was a lot, they could have done a whole Troubles storyline with Sheamus.
The Troubles in Ireland.
No, that actually would have been very sad.
That's probably. What the reference to the violence in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
In the up until the
1980s.
Yeah.
late
I am a
80s.
wrestling historian. I'm not a historian.
So the IRA and everything, the Catholics and Protestants killing each other for years and years.
That sounds
It
terrible.
was, it was a
Yeah,
thing.
it was a bad time. It was a bad time.
Bad times.
We got U2 out of it, which early albums were solid, but
Certainly.
that was about it.
Nothing since 01.
No, not at all. Matt, this was a fucking great episode.
Yeah, thank you very much
we
for
would-
coming
Thank you for
down,
having me.
man.
Yeah, we would love to have you back anytime. And in which we'll ask you more questions about your wrestling related photography, which is fucking really cool and people should go check out.
That's at Matty2J, M-A-T-T-Y, the number 2 J-A-Y on Instagram. I also post a lot of burlesque pictures, so if you're offended by boobies, don't follow me.
Wrestling and burlesque, you know what? Makes sense.
Yeah.
I can't fully explain why, but it just absolutely
they're
makes sense.
quite related.
Yeah.
That's something we should talk about with you on a future
Yeah.
episode
Yeah.
for sure. Lucha Vavoom and
Oh,
those
yeah.
kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And we're doing a premium episode with you about Hulk Hogan that
Yeah,
our $5 tier Patreon subscribers should look out for. But yeah, we should definitely have you on to talk about burlesque and wrestling and also just modern indie wrestling because
Yeah.
you're certainly a connoisseur of that as well.
Yeah, and on that note, if you want more contesting wrestling, including this premium episode we're about to record, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/contesting wrestling. For $5 a month, you get a whole extra episode every week. We have a lot of ideas brewing for other stuff we're going to do this year, and that'll all go up on there past our usual battery of episodes. So, yeah, give us a shot there. We have a bunch of stuff already up.
Follow us on Twitter at contestingw. And Instagram at Contesting Wrestling Podcast. And
And Facebook, too.
Facebook, yes, we exist
Look
there as
for
well.
us. You'll find
Do you guys have a Google Plus or a MySpace? Or
I'm pretty sure Google Plus folded because nobody was on it.
It is.
I was on
get-
Google Plus.
I get. Maybe we should make a TikTok.
You should make TikTok's fucking great.
Yeah, TikTok actually seems like a lot of fun.
I did
Yeah,
a
it does, it
TikTok
does.
with one of my cousins, and it was awesome. We did one of those dances. We learned
it's
it.
it's like Vine, but like there's more stuff you can do, kind of, right? A little bit.
It's
yeah.
sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be all kinds of stuff. Eventually, we're gonna keep doing this podcast for years, and you'll just be able to plug it into your brain feed.
Please.
And then
We'll have an edible version and smell-o-vision.
Yes, yeah. You will be able to put episodes of Contesting Wrestling in your butt and absorb all of the knowledge and jokes and stuff.
Contesting
It'll-
suppositories.
Yep. Pre-order them at Contesting W on Twitter.